what do you think the impact on the soul, regardless of whether there are secular people listening to this as well, which there will be, what's the impact on the soul to think, for a human to think that there are no intrinsic ends to human existence and it's just to be created at your own whims?
Yeah, well, first of all, just the distinction. Mimesis is the idea that the world has a shape. Poiesis is that we construct meaning. And I would say, obviously, the world is in some sense a mixture of both. You know, human beings, we're free, we're intentional creatures. We transform the environment. We don't, if I see a river, I can build a bridge over it. I can cross the river by building a bridge. I can transform the environment. In building a bridge over the river, though, I kind of respect the integrity of the river as river. So that action is both a poetic one in terms of transforming the environment, but also rests upon a deeper mimesis in that I'm saying, okay, the river's here. Let me respect the river. German philosopher Heidegger uses that example and says, there's a big difference if we dam up the river to generate hydroelectric power. Then we're seeing the river as raw material to do something completely different with. And that's him sort of getting at the distinction Taylor makes between mimesis and poiesis. I think the sense of the meaninglessness of the world, well, we've got 100 or 150 years in the West of literature and cultural artifacts that speak to that. That the big question becomes, can life be worth living in a context where there is no meaning or shape? I think it's even Nietzsche makes the comment somewhere that it's not suffering that's unbearable, it's meaningless suffering that is unbearable. So I think if you see the world as lacking any meaning or shape, the existential burden is massively increased upon you. It's easy to understand where Franz Kafka is coming from in The Trial. It's easy to see where an Albert Camus is coming from in The Myth of Sisyphus or in The Outsider. So, if you want to know what the world, how to think about the world when it has no meaning or shape, we've got a wealth of literature that you can look at for that. I think for the ordinary person in the street, it leads to, a less reflective but equally damaging kind of malaise. Life becomes what you consume. Life becomes going through the motions. Life becomes what Nietzsche calls mechanical activity. Or Nietzsche would say it becomes a kind of nihilism. Nietzsche's often decried as a nihilist. He's not really a nihilist. Nihilists for him are people who just carry on doing what they're doing with values that are either being proved to be untenable or values they've never actually questioned or owned for themselves. I think human beings become kind of what we are as a society at the moment. And if I was chatting to somebody who wasn't a Christian or a theist here, I'd say, you have now the kind of society that you will inevitably have when you have no sacred order behind it. And interesting enough, we're seeing some, interesting figures. I can't comment on the degree of seriousness with which they're engaging with Christianity, but I saw, Russell Brand was baptized last Sunday, apparently. I mean, who'd have thought Russell Brand would ever take religion seriously? Richard Dawkins is now saying he's a cultural Christian. I mean, to me, Richard Dawkins is caught in the horns of a real dilemma. He spent his entire life demolishing the foundations of the sacred order. And then suddenly it's dawned on him, which he could have spotted straight away if he'd read Nietzsche's Gay Science. Suddenly it's dawned on him that a whole heap of the stuff that he actually appreciates was originally grounded on a transcendent sacred order. Now, that's not to say that that transcendent sacred order is true, but it is to say if you're going to demolish it, you've got to accept the fact that everything else is going to come crashing down as well.
Yeah, this point of nihilism, this malaise, I do often wonder when I see the advance of certain policies. For example, the clamour now to make euthanasia widespread, assisted suicide, and who knows? I mean, from those who've implemented those already, I think the state of Victoria and Australia have done so. The safeguards that were put in have now been removed, and to bring some reality into that, so people aren't just listening to me talking about assisted suicide in an abstract policy manner. I read this story or an article that featured this 28-year-old Dutch girl She is cohabiting with her partner, and they have a dog together, a pretty normal life. She's arranged for her assisted suicide next year because she's decided that life won't get much better. It's not going to be that happy. There's pretty much nothing to live for. And it seems to me that what we're headed toward, because of having destroyed that sacred order, as it were, and the civilization, I guess, that it was built upon, is we're being tempted in this direction because we only see things through the lens of things like efficiency and pleasure. And as you have made the point implied earlier on, is that because of the technological progress we've made, it's given us this idea that we are just in control of everything, because we are materially in control of things, then we ought to be in control of everything else. And then when we realize that that's not really the case, it leaves us lots of questions unanswered. And because we don't have the moral, spiritual architecture to deal with any of that stuff anymore, is we just start going, all right, so how do we deal with unhappiness or melancholy? Well, just press the button. And it makes me ask the question, I suppose, Carl, is if we don't want to deepen this age of nihilism, if we want to call it that, maybe it's something else. And perhaps we're still seeing a cultural movement away from it. You've mentioned some key figures, and I think that surprising rebirth of the belief in God, as Justin Brierley has been popularizing recently, seems to be a thing. But if we don't want to deepen that age of nihilism, not be bewitched by technological advancements and think that we know everything, what is it that we could be doing individually, societally? And so I wonder, what are we going to do to stop us from deepening that malaise? If you had to advise people individually or those in positions of leadership, what would be your cri de coeur, the cry of the heart?
Well, going back to that Dutch girl, when we think about that, it's a very emblematic thing, because I would say what's interesting about her is she clearly feels that her life is all about her. Presumably she has parents, she has friends, she's got a boyfriend she's living with, maybe she's got children. The question becomes, your life is not all about your happiness. The problem here is you think of yourself as the center of the universe with no obligations or dependencies upon other people, such that, you may want to die, but that's going to break the hearts of your parents, for example. And that has to be taken into account. Well, why does her desire make sense in the Netherlands or in the West today? Precisely because we've come to think of ourselves as isolated individuals. So part of the way that we've got to push back on this is we've got to tilt the social imaginary away from this free, unencumbered, autonomous notion of what it means to be a human being, back to understanding proper dependencies and obligations upon other people. And that means we have to start rebuilding community. And that can't be done. You can't legislate that. I think that legislation can help, but we've really got to start it from the ground up. I can't stop legislation on assisted suicide. What I can do is try to make sure that everybody in my community circle has a life where they would never go for that option, precisely because they see themselves not as isolated individuals, but as connected to others. I had a very good friend recently whose wife, I gave the homily at her funeral just a couple of weeks ago, and she'd had terminal cancer for a year. And what really struck me about her was that every time we met, she was determined not to say goodbye. She was in a lot of pain, but she was determined to live life because it wasn't about her. It was about the friendship she had. It was about the children she had. It was about the husband she had. And he was a person who she didn't think of her illness as her own private business and nothing but her own, even down to decisions on what treatment to take. She discussed those with her loved ones because she knew that whatever her desire was, it had to be coordinated with those of others. So what we need to do is recapture the idea of human beings as being, to use other language, being encumbered selves, not unencumbered selves. That I have obligations to my children, to my wife, to my colleagues, to different levels of obligation at all. But at no point in my life is it all just about me. How we recapture that, that's difficult. But I think we can start by modeling that in our own families, modeling that in our own communities, be they religious communities or the street we live in. We all have opportunities to embody in our own lives a better and truer vision of what it means to be a human being.